Hey guys, this is Crap Hunter, and welcome back to the Langobard campaign on Attila. This is also the last episode of the Langobard campaign. Now, if you're wondering why that is, well, feel free to go to the description whereupon I have explained in high detail as to why this campaign is just dragging on and really dragging it down. It was just, no, it's not enjoyable. Not enjoyable to record, and I'm certain it's not really enjoyable to watch. So, moving on to the next part, which is basically because the Shadow Play had resetted and ended up crashing out, I'm going to make this as a sort of summary episode, so that way you got brought up to speed as to how this campaign was drew to a close. So, in the 6th episode, I was able to capture Veronia, and then I noticed that Aquila was basically at potential to grab, so I grabbed that, and then the enemy army came back, basically hit and sacked that. I personally probably should have just sacked the town and moved on to Attila, but old habits of conquering and occupying die hard. So they recaptured that, and Attila, we then spent, in the 7th episode, about 4 turns accumulating the wealth needed in order to buy finally buy a jetty. So £2,000 worth of jetty. And, the expensive buildings, just ridiculous, like where is it? There it is, the 10k. Admittedly, that's damaged now, but the 10k to convert to a burg. Anyway, going back into this sort of deal, as the turns wore on, it was quite a sort of dull affair, really, apart from watching my opponent's armies running about, the Roman separatists attempting to move up, then not attacking because I put my spy near them for some reason. That apparently scared them. Quadrians got shot up here. The Roman separatists decided to make a push, and they were able to capture that, which was cool. Oh, well, raze it to the ground, but still. I had the people in Aquila was not really happy with me being there, so they revolted, unsurprisingly. And it was shaping up to be another, not like episode 6, me not being able to do anything and just standing still and staying put, which was really frustrating. I'm a fighter, not a city person. But then, surprisingly, a strange turn of events occurred, which resulted in me actually getting the fight I wanted. As one of my governors in Augusta Trevorum decided, first of all, the game warned me that he was low in his loyalty. Now, at the time, at that point, I was a bit like, okay, I'm not entirely sure how I can improve his loyalty, so I let him be. This, unfortunately, was a bit of a bad call, because then, about a turn or two later, he decided to rebel, which is why there was a civil war in Augusta Trevorum. Which resulted in half of my army getting kicked out by another army, and him declaring war on us. So it was a big-ass rebellion, and he had an army and a garrison ready to go to attack my half-army here of mostly spearmen, and of army of spearmen and of Germanic hurlers. So that wasn't good. Not looking too good whatsoever. So we're now going to go to the battle, whereupon I will explain to you how things went, and also talk a bit about what I love when this game does work for me, or when it does, when the shiningness of the game starts to come through. Okay, so here we are on the field of battle. This was the battle in which my army of Langobard loyalists were facing against the traitorous dogs that were the Civil War Langobard separatists. So, this map in particular, I really like the look of. It was a nice sort of cold, wintry engagement. Having a look at my commander to try and sort of ascertain, to hopefully get the morale up. The enemy had reinforcements from the settlement in the distance, so it was not looking to be the most, I thought at first I wasn't too worried about the garrison though, because the garrison had taken a bit of a hit. I don't know why they didn't have a full garrison, but the unit numbers wasn't so high. But they still had cavalry, and more importantly, they had artillery. They had an onager, which I couldn't believe. I was a bit like, how the bugger did they have that? Yeah, there it is right there. So the enemy had an onager, or onager. I'm never quite sure how to pronounce it, but either way, it was a lot. Though the only miracle factor was the fact that he had the army that had supported the rebellion was made up of just like one of every unit. So there was one swordsman, one horseman, all of which they were already damaged. They also had like a slinger group and everything. So at this point in time, I'm currently just telling my guys to be careful and cautious. And for about, 2 to 3 minutes, we're sort of just stealthily approaching. I didn't want my guys to be spotted for a long time, because obviously with the Onager having superior range to my slingers, he could do some serious damage to me if I wasn't careful enough. Moving on forward a little bit in the battle, at this point my men had moved up about halfway through the forest when the enemy archers ran straight into our line, thus giving my guys a pretty easy advantage to getting like a couple of waves of missiles at those guys before they even had their first volley go off, which was very beneficial actually, considering that the rest of the enemy army, as you can see right now, were currently pushing through with a cav unit. So at this point I then decided to slow the game down a bit, so it gave me a few extra seconds to prioritize what's going on. Told my spearmen to move up behind my archers so that as they're throwing the last of their volley, the cavalry takes a nasty hit actually on the front section of there, which was, I didn't actually expect that. I thought they were still prioritizing the archers, but I guess the cavalrymen took it as they went through. So in a bit of a good maneuvering of the soldiers, by the time the enemy cavalry reaches my line, they end up getting spears instead of slingers, and I'm able to start pouncing on them whilst utilizing my archers to still prioritize their archers, so that way we can do some damage and reduce the chances of friendly fire. I use my general's war cry ability to also potentially scare the crap out of those horses as I move on to the beleaguered units from the enemy garrison force. Whilst this is going on, the enemy Onager is firing on our men, so in an attempt to try and ensure that I'm not being hit too badly, I tell my general and my spearmen to one of my spearmen units to outflank the enemy forces as we're pushing in a hope that we can do a bit of a hammer and anvil assault on the enemy position. I hadn't actually noticed that my archers were moving a little bit further close until it was a little bit too late, and they were about virtually close enough to engage when I told my commander to pincer in onto the enemy commander, the enemy governor to be exact. So there's Igrimer there. And eventually we decided to outflank and outmaneuver. And then it turned out that the enemy cavalry hadn't quite had enough spears in their face. So in an attempt to pincer, I ended up swinging round, engaging them quite ferociously. Once again, telling my archers to, instead of using their slingers, I instead focused on those archers once again. Just desperate to do stuff, and then I just realized, yeah, let's just break those guys. So the horses are now broken. Archers are still throwing some shells in, but it's not too good. Igrimer gets a sword to his face, so that's a pleasant experience. And the enemy general unit then instantly withdraws. So now that the enemy general is dead, the battle is pretty much won, but the enemy artillery is still in a position and still can do a lot of damage to my guys. So on this one, I tell my guys to sort of try and split out a bit so they're not such an easy target. Loose spacing on all of my units. I'm telling my spearmen to charge the enemy archers just so that way they can hopefully not engage my dudes. Tell my archers to stop using their missiles and instead try and utilize their swords. So it's a bit like, in a maneuver a bit like charging up on D-Day, we're now charging the Onager as it attempts to slaughter my men, but thanks to the loose spacing, we only take minimal casualties. And also desperately tries to use the war cry ability to hopefully spook those archers. Ooh, a couple of nasty hits there to my unit, but nothing too serious. Just looking at the remains, and the enemy artillery and their archers decide to bugger off, thus resulting in the end of that battle, leaving the way completely clear for my forces to move and reclaim the city of Augusta Trevorum. So here we now are on the Battle of Augusta Trevorum siege, and at this point I had only just realised that I had some onagers on my side, which was a very pleasant surprise there. Actually felt also quite realistic, as it makes sense really. When you're engaging an enemy army with siege equipment, naturally you would steal the siege equipment that they had, because, you know, why wouldn't you? So anyway, looking at the absolutely gorgeous map that Augusta Trevorum was, even though it's a small settlement, It was absolutely gorgeous. And as sieges go, this is probably going to be the most casual siege I've ever done. As my artillery fires its first barrage into our opponent's base. Only one of the shells that actually goes in hits its target, as I have a look at the villagers as well, which was quite nice. So as I said, this game is absolutely hilariously awesome. Oh, speaking of hilarious, sorry, I just spotted the very brave man in the background. There he is. I'm going to call this man the MVP of Augusta Trevorum. Like, one dude who seemingly flipped his shit and was apparently going to charge my army as my artillery decides to throw in yet another pretty decent barrage into the town. But but going on to talk about the sort of game a bit as we watch this man attempt to attack my very, very powerfully large army with just a seemingly half a walking stick. But yeah, like I said, one of the things about Attila that I loved way more than Rome is the battle scenario, like the battles in this game, because the unit cards are a lot better. The information you receive in battle is far more useful. And personally, I find, when you are engaging people, that there's a real sense of balance in this, because no one army can easily overmatch the other. Everything is very balanced. Everything works immensely well. And there is the very brave man running by my infantry as he makes a daring escape, leaving the settlement to the poor bastards still inside. So that did make me chuckle somewhat, that this man just completely abandons the settlement and buggers off to find pastures new. Bye-bye, Mr. Brave Man. You were probably not missed, but you certainly gave us a bit of a laugh. Going forward a bit, and after one accidental flaming shell from the Onager, ends up setting fire to a number of buildings inside the town. And having shelled the enemy forces enough to allow us to breach a gap in the enemy defenses, I decide to finally move my infantry up and quite happily... I'm hopefully not going to get shot up too much, as we quite happily watch the fire of the town end up burning everything, which was absolutely hilarious. I hadn't anticipated this, but this is the thing. It's like one shell is now completely burning the entire market, and the civilians are running to take cover, and the settlement is properly under siege. And this is the kind of stuff I love about this game. Just looking at how the settlement is just starting to get set afire, the Colosseum in the background, or sorry, amphitheater in the background sort of is ablaze, the flowers around it, enemy archers are now starting to unleash their fury upon us, so I put my guys into spaced loose formation, so that way we can make it. So we all decide to make a run for it now, as we're under heavy fire. The city, one of the buildings in the background is completely ablaze. Which is not the greatest news to hear, certainly if you're wanting to capture the place, but I don't care, it just looks so nice. So I tell one of my archers to try and capture one of the towers, so that way we can quite happily move into the town without getting hit too much, watching the city in the back, and just look at the detail in this, like the buildings, we've got the tents there, civilians are still walking around, there's a whole town square full of them, with a broken fountain, so that's probably not going to do too good against the fire in the background, but you never know. One of the fires has spread completely, torching a building, and unfortunately it's spreading to yet another building, which then upon we found the enemy Germanic archers who had withdrawn in our previous battle. So at this point I just tell all of my guys to charge into the building, and I did forget to turn my loose spacing off. So I wasn't entirely sure as to why I couldn't fight too well. So my apologies to all you experienced people like that. At this point I was just determined to get my guys in as I was under heavy fire. So, but that said, we were overwhelming those archers when the enemy general decided to make an appearance. And surprisingly, capturing the gatehouse somehow was able to also torch and destroy the enemy tower at the same time. So at this point I'm telling my guys to just charge straight into the city in a glorious barbarian-like fashion. There's my hurlers, there's my nobles, we're all charging straight into them, Pretty nicely done as well. A bit like the Orcs during the Battle of Minas Tirith. And the battle will start. Moving further on ahead, I then, having realised that my guys were in loose formation, I then decide to bring up my Onager crew to assist in the battle as we were taking some heavy casualties thanks to the archers in those towers. I'm kind of surprised that they were that accurate given the range and everything. So at this point I'm like, right, okay, we've got to ensure that the enemy general breaks, as they are high quality infantry. So I'm sort of looking around. The fire has actually spread to other parts of the town. And also, it does damage to the opponent's morale, as well as their attack, as well as their defense. So this does prove to be somewhat useful in the attack against the rebellion. And then my army, then my opponent's army or general does break. And at that point, I also kill his general. So there's no way in hell they're ever going to return. And so now we make our final charge against the last commander, whilst also sustaining heavy fire from those towers, though thankfully not as much as we make our way through the settlement. Most of the civilians are hopefully gone, and the settlement, which, as I'm looking at the corpses of my fellow soldiers as we're making a desperate push towards the last point, I then decide to return to some form of order in battle and tell my archers to form a line up to potentially attack, or prepared to attack my general, when two very brave, I would assume sisters, decide to attack my archers. So there goes one, and the other one lasts a bit longer, but then she turns around to find a sword in her neck. So then I tell my archers to throw some shells against my opponent to hopefully put him in loose formation, telling him to be also precise with that. And that tower I call bullshit, because it's foggy and it's an archer. No way could you use a bow that effectively in fog. Maybe in, like, depending on the circumstances, but that ain't a longbow. So anyway, my opponent decides to go into loose formation, so at this point I say, right, that's it, let's proceed to charge up the hill whilst my army moves up. Those guys are trying to fire, but obviously the view is a bit obstructed. Throwing yet more shells into it. I am doing some damage to my army, to my enemy's army at the same time. My very brave catapult, also my brave Onager crew decide to be the first to charge into the fray. And so the last battle for this settlement takes place. And I try and do an outflanking maneuver once again with my spearmen. One of my spearmen units is able to outflank my opponent's general. And now we're just going to quickly swing around to hopefully do a little Hammer und Anvil. And at this point I was hoping to sort of more or less swing around, but then I realized I was taking some damage there. I wanted to get in quickly. And soon as that happened, the enemy just started to get shaken. He was already very tired. My guys were virtually exhausted, but due to just superior numbers, it was only a matter of time before he broke. And there we go, completely destroying the remnants of his army. Though that said, this cheeky bugger decided to cheat a bit and just clipped through the enemy, through the tents, which my guys couldn't, thus forcing me to destroy them as we go off to chase him. So now let's take you back to the campaign map to end the summary. So there you guys have it. Those two were the last battles of Attila Total War campaign. Now, I'm going to do a little bit of a summary, because obviously we had to cut this campaign short. And I'm going to say now, the game, it's not a bad game, and personally, I really enjoy the fighting aspects of it. The battle situation, the battle style is immersive, the graphics is gorgeous. Whenever you go onto the campaign map, you really feel as if the area that your soldiers were standing, just as the battle started, was there. All of these things make the battle just fantastic to play. The campaign, though, that's the big letdown. I mean, if I just had the ability to choose what kind of troops I had, rather than be forced to lumber with the more expensive, the more ludicrously priced buildings, I think this game would be far more enjoyable to play, and I could certainly make way more progress than, say, than I have, that I could have achieved. But unfortunately, you know, the Attila system. This particular system, just not so good at the moment. So, but I will be returning to this game at some point, just under heavily modded circumstances. So anyway, guys, thank you very much for watching this campaign. And as always, let me know in the comments section down below if there's anything I could do to improve or make the next one even more awesome than the last. So anyway, I will catch you not next Friday for a Total War, as I'm going to take a bit of a break from that, and those Friday afterwards I will be coming back with a new Total War campaign. As to what, we're not sure. Anyway, guys, I'll catch you next time. This is Craphunter, signing out.